The war between Ukraine and Russia flared up after the second half of December. In eastern Ukraine, Bakhmut and its environs are the center of the conflict. Against the Russian advance in Bakhmut, Ukraine sent its most elite troops, including Azov Regiment and Chechen battalions, to defend the region. Chechens became one of the important factors in the Ukraine war. Even though the majority of the people of Chechnya rejected the war, Chechen leader Kadyrov's closeness to Vladimir Putin drew Chechnya into the war. From the second month of the war, 4 of the Chechen battalions, which started to be sent to the Ukrainian front, are currently fighting against the Russians together with the Ukrainian armed forces. But Kadyrovites, who support the Chechen leader, continue to fight against Ukraine on the Russian front. Now, according to the hot news from the front, Russian troops are starting to withdraw from Bakhmut and its surroundings. Under intense pressure from the Ukrainian army, Russian troops withdrew from Kreminna to Rubizhne, 15 kilometers south of the front line. The Kreminna highway between Donetsk and Luhansk is currently under the control of the Ukrainian armed forces. Russians also suffer significant losses in the Luhansk region. The raid of Ukrainian artillery and special operations units in both Donetsk and Luhansk regions yesterday evening had great results. Ukrainian artillery has blockaded some of the occupied settlements, forcing the Russians to defend in all areas. The attacks of the Ukrainian army mostly harm the troops of Kadyrov and Prigozhin, who are trying to gain influence in the Russian army. So far, there are reports that the death toll of Kadyrovites in Ukraine is more than 10,000. Kadyrov's troops are mainly concentrated in the Bakhmut and Donbas regions. Generally speaking, we know that Putin used the Kadyrovites as cannon fodder and tried to benefit from their war experience. However, Kadyrov, who could not stand up to his increasing losses, continues to help Russia even if he accepts the losses. According to a Ukrainian close to the action, thousands of Russian soldiers have already died in the ongoing battle for Bakhmut. So far, many Kadyrov bases in Donetsk, Luhansk, and Kherson region have been destroyed by Ukrainian HIMARS. In August, Kadyrov's main base in Luhansk was hit by HIMARS, and over 500 casualties were reported at once. Kadyrov's bases in Donbas were destroyed in September and October. His bases in Kherson were blown up by HIMARS. These losses, one after another, dealt a heavy blow to Kadyrov. After Kadyrov's great defeat in Kherson, only his headquarters in Zaporizhia remained in the south. But that too is now history. The latest major blow to Kadyrov came earlier this week in Zaporizhia, the center of the conflict in the south. Except for Tokmak in the Zaporizhia region, another of Kadyrov's headquarters was blown up by Ukrainian artillery. The attack took place somewhere in the Tokmak region around 10:50 p.m. to 11:40 at night. Local sources reported that a large number of Chechens were burned in their sleep, along with the headquarters of the occupation forces. Between 200 and 500 Russian and Kadyrov soldiers were reportedly eliminated. Undoubtedly, the Russian army is going through hell in Ukraine, and the big supporter of the Russian army, the slapstick Kadyrov, is suffering the heaviest losses. Kadyrov, who was blowing and roaring at the beginning of the war, no longer even has the courage to appear in front of the media and make a statement. But despite the losses, Vladimir Putin's pressure to support Kadyrov continues. Ukrainian intelligence and security officials claim that at the start of the war in Ukraine, President Vladimir Putin ordered Chechen leader Ramzan Kadyrov to occupy government buildings in Kiev and assassinate the Ukrainian president. According to Chechen residents, when Putin needed more soldiers on the rapidly dispersing front lines, the warlord sometimes forcibly rounded up thousands and sent them in. Now, after Russia's successive withdrawal, Kadyrov's men are disciplining demoralized Russian troops at the front and rooting out alleged spies on occupied Ukrainian territory. Sometimes they resort to torture, Ukrainian officials and human rights organizations say. Since the beginning of the invasion, Putin has relied on army officers, businessmen, and rogue actors to provide what the Kremlin needs most to continue its protracted offensive. One of the president's most staunch figures in the war effort has been Kadyrov, who publicly calls himself Putin's infantryman. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov denied that the Russian leader ordered the Chechen warlord to assassinate Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky, calling the allegation absolutely absurd, baseless, and false. Kadyrov did not respond to requests for comment. According to documents and interviews with Ukrainian officials and people close to the Kremlin, Mr. Putin has used Russia's large budget for decades to support Kadyrov. Now the 46-year-old Chechen dictator is scrambling to meet the Russian leader's critical war demands. one of the most important relationships in Russia, the relationship demonstrates the risks and rewards of supporting Putin's system. Kadyrov serves as a Kremlin enforcer in Chechnya, a restless republic in Russia's North Caucasus. Over the course of nearly 20 years, Moscow sent him billions of dollars, which he used to administer his territory as a personal fief with its own highly trained private army. Ongoing government funding supports Kadyrov's control of power in the predominantly Muslim region, which residents and analysts say many hate. Yekaterina Sokiryanskaya, a longtime expert on Chechnya at the International Crisis Group, a Brussels-based think tank, said, Putin's support and money transformed Kadyrov from scratch into a hero, so to speak, but also made him vulnerable and totally dependent. It's at the center of everything he's doing right now. According to a former Kremlin official and someone else close to the Kremlin, the Chechen leader has a rare direct line with Putin, and the president contacts Kadyrov personally, not through his aides, as is the case with other governors of Russia, to continue his role in the war, which he is sure he has documented extensively on social media. Kadyrov said that Chechnya deserves hundreds of billions of rubles in new investments. Kremlin spokesman Mr. Peskov said that the Russian president appreciated Kadyrov's managerial qualities, but added that their relationship did not go beyond the head of state and the head of an issue. Peskov said Putin and Kadyrov spoke regularly about the war effort, noting that the two Chechen battalions were on the front lines. Political analysts say Mr. Kadyrov is currently trying to undermine others with whom he is competing for cash from the Kremlin. He has become one of the leading critics of the Russian Ministry of Defense, blaming at least one general publicly responsible for failures on the battlefield, something that could send the average Russian citizen into years in prison. Before Putin came to power, Kadyrov and the Kremlin were on opposite sides. Chechen and his father, Akhmat, fought alongside separatist rebels against the Russians in the First Chechen War of the 1990s, before switching sides and joining Moscow to seize control in 2000. After Kadyrov's father was killed in a bomb explosion in 2004, Putin summoned the then 27-year-old tracksuit-wearing Kadyrov to the Kremlin to show his support. When Kadyrov turned 30, he took the place of his father, taking over the head of Chechnya. In 2017 and 2020, the United States sanctioned Kadyrov for alleged human rights abuses by his own troops in his home country, where it pressured the rest of the separatists and those who opposed him. The U.S. said its forces were involved in the 2015 killing of prominent Russian opposition leader Boris, who was shot dead just steps from the Kremlin. In September, the U.S. again sanctioned Putin for facilitating his invasion of Ukraine, saying that the Kremlin pays about $6.5 billion into Chechnya's coffers every year. Kadyrov said in a press release he posted on a messenger app, where he had a prolific presence and often played in his own videos to communicate directly with the public. According to Russian budget data, the Kremlin provides about 80% of the region's funds. Peskov said that each Russian region receives money from Moscow, and the amount of subsidies to Chechnya changes every year. So, Kadyrov amassed excessive wealth as a result of his close relationship with Vladimir Putin. Kadyrov's troops entered Ukraine in 3 columns of heavily armed personnel carriers on February 25th, the day after the invasion. In a video captured by Ukrainian intelligence and released later, a senior official loyal to Kadyrov informed his bosses that the mission had begun. Kadyrov posted videos of attacks with camouflage and night vision goggles, heavy machine guns, and sniper rifles for days on his personal channel, where he has more than 3 million followers. However, like other Russian troops on the front line, the Chechens face stiff resistance. The first of the 3 groups was almost completely destroyed on the outskirts of Kiev. The other 2 groups halted their advance to regroup and never reached the capital. The failed effort heralded a much larger struggle for Putin and Kadyrov. President of Ukraine Zelensky not only survived, he succeeded. As the military operation broke out, Kadyrov turned to his people for shadow mobilization. According to local residents and human rights defenders, Kadyrov's security forces put the most vulnerable into service. It is clear that the relations between Kadyrov and Putin are based on a relationship of interest. Kadyrov got most of what he wanted and gained some serious power in the Kremlin. On the other hand, war analysts may be preparing to avenge Kadyrov's father. We will see together what will happen to this relationship as a result of the war.